So this isn't just a story about a war. This is the story of how an invincible land army was forced, kicking and screaming, to learn how to fight at sea. And it's all about how the future of the entire Western world really came down to a single, kind of crazy invention. All right, let's get right into it. So picture this. It's the 3rd century BC, and the Western Mediterranean is basically a two-player game. You've got Rome on one side. By now they've conquered all of mainland Italy. Their legions are just terrifying. Disciplined, relentless, the best land army on the planet. And on the other side, you've got Carthage. They're based over in modern-day Tunisia, and they're this massive trade empire. Their navy? Well, let's just say they owned the sea, no question. For a long time, these two powers kind of grew alongside each other, keeping this very nervous peace going, mostly because they were both scared of each other. But as they both got bigger and bigger, the buffer zone between them was just disappearing. Conflict wasn't just likely, it was pretty much guaranteed. And the spark that was going to light the whole thing up? This one island, smack dab in the middle of everything. Sicily.
So the war kicks off, and it's over some small-time squabble in a Sicilian city. But man, it spirals out of control fast. And it starts exactly how you'd expect it to, as a total disaster for Rome.
And what's crazy here is just how lopsided this was. Carthage's warships, these huge things called quinqueremes, were the absolute cutting-edge naval tech. They were fast, they had a ton of them, and their crews were guys who'd spent their whole lives on the water. Rome's first attempts to build a navy to fight them, let's be honest, they were a complete joke. They were clumsy, they were slow, and they just got annihilated in their first few fights. So this creates this massive, massive problem for Rome, right? Their legions are totally crushing it on land in Sicily, winning battle after battle. But here's the thing, it just didn't matter. Carthage could just sail around them, resupply their own cities, and completely ignore the Roman armies. Every land victory was becoming totally meaningless. So what are you going to do? Well, the Romans figured out pretty quick they couldn't outsail the Carthaginians. Nope, couldn't beat them at their own game. So what did they do? They decided to change the rules of the game completely. And this right here, this is pure Roman thinking. They were staring down an impossible problem, and their solution was just, well, it was desperate, and it was brilliant. They decided, fine, if we can't win on the water, we'll just have to bring the land to the sea.
And this is the absolutely wild invention they came up with. It's called the Corvus, which is Latin for the crow. Now, look, this thing was not elegant. It was a big, ugly, brutal piece of military hardware, a total hack. It was basically a huge 36-foot-long boarding ramp on a swivel with a massive, heavy iron spike on the end that looked like a bird's beak.
And how it worked was just brilliantly simple and totally brutal. A Roman ship would get up close to a Carthaginian one. Then, wham, they'd cut the rope, and this thing would slam down on the enemy deck, and that giant spike would punch right through the planks, locking the two ships together. And just like that, it wasn't a sea battle anymore. It was a land battle, right there on the water. The Roman legionaries would just pour across the bridge, and now it was their kind of fight. You can probably guess what happened next. The effect of this one invention was just instantaneous. It changed everything. I mean, the results were just mind-blowing. At the Battle of Mylae, and then again at the even bigger Battle of Cape Icnumis, Rome started winning these shocking naval victories against the undisputed masters of the sea. For the very first time, Rome was a real sea power. But, and this is a huge but, this incredible piece of tech had a terrible hidden flaw. So here's the deal. That huge, heavy Corvus perched on the front of their ships made them incredibly top-heavy and unstable. In calm seas, it was a genius weapon, but when one of those infamous Mediterranean storms blew in, it basically turned their ships into death traps. And the price they paid for this was just staggering. Throughout the war, Rome lost entire fleets. We're talking hundreds of ships and well over 100,000 men, not to the enemy, but to storms, to the sea itself. Yeah, the very thing that was winning them the war was also drowning their own sailors by the tens of thousands. So you can imagine this thing just dragged on. We're talking 23 long, grueling years. It was just a meat grinder, a war of attrition. Rome would get beaten, they'd adapt with the Corvus and win, then they'd lose a whole fleet to a storm and have to start over. But in the end, what won the war wasn't brilliant naval tactics. It was pure Roman stubbornness. Worn down and exhausted, Carthage finally asked for peace. But here's the thing. This wasn't really the end of the story. Think of it more like a furious pause. Because the peace treaty that ended this war, planted the seeds for a much bigger, much more terrible war to come. So yeah, on paper, Rome got everything it wanted. Carthage had to get out of Sicily, and Rome took it over. They also forced Carthage to pay a gigantic fine. But honestly, forget the money, forget the land, the real lasting impact: wounded pride, humiliation. And there was one Carthaginian general who would never forget it. His name was Hannibal Barca. And the legend, it's an incredible story, is that he took his little boy, who was only 9 years old, to a sacred altar. He had the boy put his hand on the sacrifice, and he made him swear an oath that he would spend his entire life as an enemy of Rome, an unbreakable oath. That little boy would grow up to become one of the most brilliant and most feared military commanders in all of human history. His name, of course, was Hannibal. So it all comes down to this. The First Punic War may have ended with a treaty, but it created an enemy who would one day bring Rome to its knees. And it leaves you with one chilling question. What happens when a sacred promise of revenge is made by a military genius? Well, that's a story for another day.